Hello, space travelers. Welcome to the channel where people create stories about the universe. Get ready for a new adventure.
The training planet didn't seem dangerous at first glance. From orbit, I saw soft bands of color, slow-moving clouds, and wide areas of land that looked calm enough for people to live on. There were no raging storms or blazing surfaces like the ones you usually see on high-risk worlds. That's exactly why it worked. Instructor Grator stood inside the observation tower, his tall body turned toward the main screen while our transport dropped through the atmosphere. A technician announced that surface conditions matched the expected projections. Temperatures were climbing near the equator, but atmospheric toxin levels remained steady. Grator gave a small nod to show he understood. The intake sequence began. Below us, the transport pushed through the last layer of clouds and lined up with the landing zone. The terrain looked harmless: dark soil, scattered rocks, and patches of low vegetation. Nothing about it looked dangerous right away. That was the whole idea. Inside the transport, all of us recruits sat quietly. We came from different species, built in different ways, but every one of us had been labeled resilient, at least according to the files. I sat near the back, relaxed, with one hand resting on my knee. I hadn't said a word since boarding. Through the small viewport, I watched the ground slowly come into focus. The land looked dry, with barely any plant life, and heat waves shimmered across the surface even before we landed. I took a slow breath. The air inside the transport was filtered, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Across from me, a tall, segmented recruit shifted nervously. "You know what this place really is?" it asked. I glanced over for a second. "Training," I said. The recruit made a low sound. "Training doesn't remove the ones who fail." I nodded once. "Yeah." My voice stayed calm. I wasn't denying it or worrying about it. I was just accepting the fact. Then the transport touched down. The rear hatch opened and heat poured inside right away. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It was heavy, the kind of heat that settles onto your body and refuses to leave. "Disembark," a voice ordered. The recruits started moving. Some rushed out quickly. Others hesitated before stepping forward. I walked out with the rest of them. The ground felt solid beneath my boots. Gravity pulled a little stronger than I expected. Not enough to knock me off balance, but enough to notice. Without thinking, I adjusted my stance. From above, Grator watched as we gathered together. "Begin environmental exposure," he ordered. The filters shut off instantly. We all felt the difference at once. The air was thick. It wasn't impossible to breathe, just wrong. Every breath carried trace toxins that forced our bodies to work harder. Several recruits reacted immediately. Some coughed, others shifted, trying to adjust. I took one slow breath, then another. My body adapted to the change, not comfortably but without panic. Grator noticed. "Interesting," he said quietly. The briefing started right after. There was no long speech or detailed explanation, just the essentials. "Survive," the instructor's voice echoed across the field. 3 cycles. No resources will be provided." He paused briefly. "Extraction will occur for those who complete the trial." Another pause followed. "For those who do not, extraction will be unnecessary." Silence settled over us. Everyone understood what that meant. Then we were released. No directions, no guidance, just open terrain stretching in every direction. Some recruits ran immediately, trying to put distance between themselves and the landing zone. Others stayed still, watching and analyzing before moving. I did neither. I just walked, not fast, not slow, steady. As I moved, I studied the ground, soil texture, plant patterns, rock placement. I didn't waste a single glance. Behind me, footsteps scattered as recruits chose different paths. Some were already struggling. The heat kept rising as the cycle went on. The sun burned through the thin clouds overhead, pushing temperatures higher every hour. Sweat formed quickly on exposed skin. It didn't evaporate well. The air just held it there. I adjusted my pace. Not faster, just more controlled. Energy mattered. Water mattered more. I noticed the first hint of moisture near the edge of a shallow depression. The soil there looked darker. I crouched and pressed my hand into it. It felt cool beneath the surface. I looked around but saw no visible water source. That meant the moisture was trapped underground. I started digging, not deep, just enough. Moisture slowly gathered. Not enough to drink straight from the ground, but enough to collect. I tore a strip of fabric from my sleeve, pressed it into the soil, then squeezed the damp cloth into my mouth. The taste was bitter. Contaminants. I swallowed anyway. It wasn't enough to hurt me yet, but it was enough to stay ahead. I stood up and kept moving. Above me, Grator watched through the feed. "He's conserving movement," one technician noted. "And identifying resources," another added. Grator said nothing as he observed. The next phase began before the first cycle even ended. The ground started to shift. At first, the tremors were subtle. Then they grew stronger. Rock formations cracked apart. Sections of earth collapsed inward, exposing deeper layers and things hiding beneath them. Creatures. They looked small at first glance. Fast, though. They burst out from the broken ground and scattered across the surface. Some recruits ran into them immediately, and the outcomes weren't equal. One recruit tried to outrun a group. It failed. Another tried fighting without understanding how they moved. That one failed even faster. I stopped when I spotted them. They weren't close, but close enough. I crouched slightly and watched. The creatures moved in patterns, not randomly. They reacted to motion and turned aggressive toward it. I picked up a small stone. I threw it, not at them, but past them. The creatures reacted instantly, rushing toward the disturbance. While they moved that way, I went the opposite direction. Slow, controlled, quiet. They didn't follow me. Grator leaned closer to the display. "He's testing behavior," he said. The heat kept climbing. As the cycle reached its second half, conditions worsened. The air grew denser. Toxin levels increased. Breathing became harder, even for species built for harsh environments. I slowed my breathing, long inhales, long exhales, to reduce strain. Eventually, I found shade beneath a fractured rock formation. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I sat down for a moment. I didn't fully rest. I was just trying to limit how much exposure I took. Then I reached down into the soil near the base of the rock. My fingers brushed against small roots. I pulled one loose and looked it over. I smelled it first, then took a small bite. It tasted bitter, fibrous but not immediately dangerous. I chewed slowly. I swallowed and waited for a reaction. Nothing happened, so I took another bite. Then one more. Up in the observation tower, one of the watchers spoke. "He's eating local plant life." "Without full analysis," another added. Grator didn't look surprised. "He's testing dosage." Down below, I kept going. I didn't eat fast. I didn't eat much either. Just enough. Always just enough. The cycle continued, and other recruits started failing. Some collapsed from the heat, others from exhaustion. Some simply couldn't understand the environment fast enough. Extraction units arrived when needed. Silent, efficient. They removed bodies. They removed failures. I kept moving, one step at a time. No wasted motion. No extra effort. As daylight faded, the temperature dropped, and not slowly. The heat disappeared fast, replaced by biting cold. Sharp. Penetrating. I adjusted again. I moved more. Not to go faster, but to stay warm. I gathered loose debris, dry plants and broken fragments, and stacked them against a rock wall. It wasn't a real shelter, just a windbreak. I sat behind it, reducing exposure as much as possible. My body temperature stabilized. Above me, Grator continued watching. "He hasn't stopped adapting," a technician said. "No," Grator replied. "He hasn't stopped learning." Another observer shifted uneasily. "He should be failing." Grator kept his eyes on the display. I sat behind my rough barrier, calmly chewing another piece of root I had pulled from the ground. Unhurried, relaxed, still thinking. Grator spoke quietly. "Humans will never survive Death World training." It wasn't an opinion, it was doctrine, something repeated because it had always been true. Below, I swallowed and reached for another piece of root. I kept eating. The cycle wasn't over yet. The second cycle began before full daylight returned. The temperature rose again, but this time it felt different. The heat came with pressure. Gravity increased. Not enough to pin me down, but enough to drain energy fast. Every step required more effort. Every action cost more than before. In the observation tower, new readings filled the screens. Gravitational shift confirmed. Output increased by 20% compared to the previous cycle. Instructor Grator watched without emotion. "Monitor muscular response," he ordered. Below, the remaining recruits reacted immediately. Some slowed down right away. Others tried to force their way through it and burned energy too quickly. A few collapsed completely, unable to adapt to the extra strain. I didn't stop, but I changed. My stride shortened. My posture lowered. Each step landed carefully. I didn't fight the added weight. I worked with it. From above, a technician spoke. He adjusted within seconds. Grator gave a small nod. He accepted the condition instead of resisting it. I moved toward higher ground. Not quickly, just steadily. Elevation meant visibility, and visibility meant planning. Halfway up a rocky slope, I paused. Not because I was tired, because I was watching. The terrain below had changed. Pockets of heat formed unevenly, bending the air in strange patterns. Some areas shimmered more intensely than others. I studied the pattern carefully. Then I altered my route, avoiding the worst zones. The path was longer, but it saved energy. Far below, another recruit chose the direct path. It entered one of the shimmering zones. Within minutes, its movements became unstable. Then it collapsed. Extraction followed. I didn't look back. At the top of the incline, I found wind, hot, but moving. It helped. I sat briefly and pulled another root from the ground. This one was different. Thicker, harder. I cracked it open against a rock and found a softer core inside. I ate slowly, testing again. Always testing. Above, an observer spoke. He's still consuming native material. Grator watched closely. He hasn't encountered a fatal toxin yet. Another technician added, statistically unlikely. Grator replied calmly, he reduces intake until it isn't. Below, I finished eating and stood up. Then I started moving along the ridge. The environment changed again. Clouds gathered overhead, heavy though not dense. The air thickened. Then the first drop fell. It wasn't water, it was acid. The drop struck stone with a faint hiss. Then another followed, and another. Within moments, the rain intensified. Recruits caught in the open reacted instantly. Some ran, others tried to shield themselves. Neither worked well. The rain spread quickly across the terrain. I stopped and looked up once. Then I moved. Not away from the rain. Toward structure. I found a fractured overhang, shallow but angled enough to deflect most of the falling drops. I positioned myself near the inner edge, minimizing exposure. A few droplets still touched my skin. They burned lightly. I didn't react. I shifted a few inches, reducing contact even more. Then I waited. No wasted movement, no panic, just endurance. The rain lasted a long time. Below me, the ground changed as the acid reacted with the surface. New openings formed. Old paths collapsed. When the rain finally stopped, the terrain was completely different, sharper, less stable. I stepped out carefully, testing every foothold. Gravity still pressed heavily. The ground couldn't be trusted. I adjusted again. Slow steps, balanced weight. I moved down from the ridge, not toward open terrain, toward an area where the ground had collapsed, exposing deeper layers where new resources might exist. Movement below caught my attention. This time it was something larger, not the small, fast creatures from earlier. Something heavier, slower. It moved through the broken ground with force. I stopped at a safe distance and watched. The creature dug into the earth, feeding on something beneath the surface, completely focused. I crouched and picked up a piece of broken stone. Then I threw it, not at the creature, but nearby. The creature reacted immediately. It turned and moved toward the sound. I moved the opposite way, using the creature's distraction to my advantage. I reached the area it had been digging in. The ground there was torn up and soft. I dropped to my knees. I started digging. My hands found something thick and fibrous, underground growth. I pulled it free. It was bigger than the roots I'd found earlier. I cracked it open and saw moisture inside. I drank slowly. Then I ate, careful and controlled. Up in the tower, one observer spoke. He's using other organisms to locate resources. Grator replied. He lets them do the work. The second cycle dragged on. Fatigue started building, even for those still standing. Gravity, toxins, heat, and constant hazards pushed everybody closer to failure. I kept moving, never fast, never careless, always adapting, always adjusting. As the cycle neared its end, the temperature dropped again. This time, it happened even faster. The cold returned harder than before, and strong winds cut across the terrain. I gathered materials again, but this time I did more. I dug into the side of a slope, creating a shallow hollow. Then I lined it with dry debris. I positioned myself inside. The ground held leftover heat while the wind passed overhead. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I ate again, small pieces, just enough to maintain energy and keep my body functioning. Above, Grator watched silently. One technician spoke. He has stabilized his condition across both cycles. Grator didn't answer right away. He studied the list of remaining recruits. There were only a few left. Very few. Then his attention returned to me. He does not try to dominate the environment, Grator said. He integrates with it. The third cycle began with movement. Not environmental this time. Intentional. Predatory. The creatures returned. They came in larger groups, moving with coordination, drawn by activity, heat, and living presence. I heard them before I saw them. I stood up. I didn't run, not yet. Instead, I moved toward uneven terrain where footing would be difficult. Not for me, for them. The creatures rushed forward, fast and aggressive. I picked up another stone and threw it. Again, not at them, but off to the side. Some followed the distraction. Some didn't. So I adjusted. I changed direction and kept my distance, guiding their movement. I led them toward a narrow passage between rock formations. The path forced them into a line, reducing how many could reach me at once. I stopped and turned. The first creature lunged. This time, I didn't dodge. I stepped forward. One motion. My hand struck the side of its head, not with strength but with precision. Its momentum broke instantly. It fell, blocking the path behind it. The others slammed into it and slowed. I moved again. I never stayed in one place. I cleared the area and left them behind. Above, the observation room fell silent. The data spoke for itself. Adaptation, efficiency, control. Finally, Grator spoke. He is not surviving the training. A technician looked at him confused. No, Grator continued, eyes fixed on the display. He is solving it. The final phase approached. Only time remained, the last hours of the third cycle. Most recruits had already been extracted, some alive, some not. I kept moving across the terrain at the same steady pace I had started with. No rushing, no collapse. When the extraction signal finally activated, it came without warning. A beacon lit up nearby. A shuttle descended. The ground stabilized and environmental conditions began to normalize. I walked toward the shuttle. Not faster, just finished. I stepped inside and sat down. My breathing was steady. My hands were steady. There was no strain beyond what the environment had required. The hatch closed. The shuttle lifted off. Inside the observation tower, nobody spoke for several moments. Then a technician said quietly, "He completed all cycles." Grator nodded. "Yes." Another added, "Without external support." "Yes." A pause followed, and without significant injury. Grator reviewed the final data, then looked back at the empty world below. "Record the result," he said. The technician hesitated. "What classification?" Grator considered the question before answering. "Baseline." The technician looked uncertain. "Baseline, Instructor?" Grator's tone remained calm. "This is not exceptional for his species." He paused. "This is normal." The record was updated. On the returning shuttle, I sat quietly. I finished the last piece of route I had carried with me, chewing slowly. Not because I needed it anymore, just because I could. The training world faded behind us, unchanged, still hostile, still lethal, but no longer unfamiliar. For most species, it remained a place that broke them. For one human, it had become something else. Not an enemy, not a trial, just an environment. And in that environment, I had done what humans have always done. I learned it. I used it. I made it work. By the time the shuttle reached orbit, the conclusion was already written into the official record. Simple. Unavoidable. Humans didn't fail Death World training. They adapted until it stopped being a Death World at all.